And I'd like to turn it over to our presenter today, Pat Politano, who's going to be talking about creating individualized communication profiles. Sure.
Hi, this is Pat Politano, and I work at the Assistive Technology Unit here at the University of Illinois in the Department of Disability and Human Development. And I want to thank the Illinois Autism Project for sponsoring this webinar. I'm really excited to bring this material to you. So the goal of this webinar is to provide you with some tools and strategies to support the communication needs of those individuals who communicate in their own way, using signals, behaviors, and sometimes adapted signs that are often only understood by people who know them best. So more specifically, I'll be talking about strategies for generating a list of those idiosyncratic communicative behaviors. Then I'll talk a little more about other information that about the individual's interests and communication style that can also be useful to new communication partners, because we know that different behaviors can mean different things in different contexts, and usually the people who know them best, if they know that context, they can figure it out better. Finally, I'll talk to you about how to share that information using individualized communication profiles so that the person's communication attempts will be able to be understood by more people, or so that that person can be successful in more communicative interactions. The Communication Bill of Rights was put forth in 1992 by the National Joint Committee for the Communication Needs of Persons with Severe Disabilities. And this chart on this slide represents one accessible version of those rights that I like to share with individuals who are able to read them and represent and understand some of the symbols. So include such things as the right to be offered real choices, the right to refuse or say no, the right to ask for what you want, the right to be heard and responded to. And it can be difficult for us to honor those rights for someone when they communicate using idiosyncratic communication methods or methods that aren't easily understood. So I believe that everyone has the right to communicate in their own way. And the first step to being good communicators for us is to take time to learn the communication methods the person already uses and to respond to those. So some communication methods can be more subtle, and you might not even recognize them as communication attempts. Further, I believe that we need to find ways to teach more people to understand those methods and respond to them. And by people, I mean school staff, group home staff, other relatives, peers. Because when you think about it, communication breakdown happens when people don't speak the same language. Very often, I'll be asked to work with a team to assess an adult or a child with autism who does not speak. I always start by saying, how does he communicate with you? How do you know what he wants or when he's upset? Sometimes the response I get is, well, he doesn't communicate, he doesn't talk. I think it's because people think that if someone's not talking, they're not communicating. And so the team will just want me to identify a communication aid, this person, so they can talk, so that will magically fix everything. Personally, I think it's easier to teach the staff to learn the language of the person with autism than to start by getting them to understand and respond to that person's subtle communication attempts. This is often my first line of intervention. And through that process of learning all the things that person attempts to communicate in their own way, I also discover those messages that are important to that person, and they might be motivated to learn a new way to communicate using a communication aid. So let's talk a little bit about what I mean about idiosyncratic communicative behaviors. In your own life experience, you may have witnessed young children developing signals to have their needs met long before they could say any words. They might point to indicate what they want or put their arms up to request you to pick them up. And so sometimes idiosyncratic communicative behaviors look like common gestures, and sometimes they're communicative, but then sometimes they're communicative behaviors that are more subtle and only understood by familiar people. So a parent can pick up on really subtle things. So they might pick up on their child's emotions just by looking at their facial expressions. They can anticipate that their child is getting agitated or upset. And body posture can be a way to communicate also. So in this slide, there are some clip art examples showing a man slumped in a chair, a woman with a grimacing face standing with her arms folded, and a girl with fisted hands. And you can see What's the problem?
It doesn't have the image of it.
Oh, that's okay. Oh, I guess I changed the slide.
Oh.
Someone's pointing out to me. The slide I have in front of you actually has a girl sitting on the floor crying. And then also there's a girl who's standing up with her hands fisted. And you can see the tension throughout her body. So there's a few different ways that you may have seen someone use body posture to communicate. Often individuals, not just kids but adults too, will pull someone and try to get them to follow them. Now this communicative behavior can have different meanings in different situations. For example, it might just be because they want to escape the situation, or maybe because they want that person to help them get something they want. And I would call these common gestures or communicative behaviors that could potentially be understood by most people. This slide has two images. There's a boy pointing to items on a shelf in a store, and the other image is a girl pointing to her shoe. And I want you to think about the fact that this behavior can be interpreted different ways by different people. Now, I know there's some text there, but forget about that. Actually, I guess she's pointing to her sock, but just ignore that. Assume she's pointing to a shoe. So sometimes it's necessary to know the person to know what they might be trying to convey. For example, if you know that she doesn't like to wear shoes, she might be saying, take these off, or loosen the ties, they're too tight. Or she might be asking you to tie her shoe, or retie the shoe because it was tied the wrong way by somebody else and maybe the bow is crooked. Or if you know she loves to buy shoes, she might be saying, look at my new shoes. So you can see how a behavior can be interpreted different ways. And if you have some context and if you know more about that person and their interests and things that bother them, then you're even better able to understand the communicative behavior. The next slide shows a woman who's holding out a jelly jar in her outstretched arm. These are all communicative behaviors. A little less subtle is when someone shows you an object that represents a specific activity. So this slide shows 3 different objects that could be used to tell someone, I want to leave. Let's go right now. So there's a man on the left that has your car keys, a man in the middle that has your purse, and a man on the right that's holding a coat. So if someone offered you any of these things, you might get the idea, well, he's trying to tell you, take these things because we're getting out of here, because those represent those to them. And sometimes an object represents a whole event. And this photo, the young man is showing you his medal from Special Olympics. Some communication methods are even more subtle, and you might not even realize they are attempts to communicate. Over the years, I've had the opportunity to work with over 500 adults, many of whom were never taught any formal communication methods. And out of a strong desire to communicate, they developed their own ways. And through meeting all these individuals and working with their teams, I learned new ways of communicating that I had never even been tuned into. And one of those communication methods they taught me about is something that is referred to as proximity. And that just means it's the act of standing or sitting next to something as a means of communicating, of communication. So in this image, the man is standing next to the door. And I've met people who would linger near a door when they wanted to go out. And that was the only way you would know. They would stand by the door, and that was their way of communicating that they wanted to go. Or someone would stand in a kitchen, and that meant they wanted to eat or drink. And they hadn't ever learned another way to signal specifically what they wanted. They would just stand in that area. And even more subtle, I've also observed individuals who would stand near a group of peers or a group of staff members because they wanted to interact with them and they didn't know how. So the act of standing next to them was their way of showing a desire to participate or to communicate with the group or to communicate with somebody in the group. In addition, I've seen individuals who use wheelchairs who would actually use this proximity as a way to communicate that I don't want to talk to you anymore. So they might wheel next to you when they want to talk to you, and then they would turn their chair around and wheel the other way to say, I'm done with you. So proximity is a way of communicating both a desire as well as a lack of desire for interaction. So as I said in the beginning, some communicative behaviors are unique to an individual and might only be understood by someone who knows them well. And sometimes, if we don't respond to the subtle signals, those communicative behaviors can escalate to behavior that is harmful to the person or even harmful to others. So it's really important for us to identify what those subtle behaviors are so that we can identify them, and for everyone to identify them and respond to them. So how do we find out what all those behaviors are, and how do we share them and teach more people how to communicate, to recognize them all? So two tools that I like to use, one is a personal communication dictionary, often called a gesture dictionary, and the other is a personal communication passport. So I want to talk to you about what those look like. So a communication dictionary typically has 3 columns. The first column is a list of communicative behaviors, or what the person does. The second column is what the behavior can mean. Someone can have multiple behaviors that mean the same thing. For example, they can have multiple things they do to indicate refusal. So in the first column, I might say pushing items away, and that can mean refusal. Sitting on the floor, and that can mean refusal. Leaving a room, that can mean refusal. So multiple behaviors can have the same meaning. In addition, the person can have one behavior that means multiple things. So consider the person who is standing by the classroom door. That could mean he wants to take a walk. That could mean he wants to use the bathroom. That could mean he wants to get a drink of water from the water fountain. So that one behavior could mean multiple things, and this dictionary is a way for people to have an idea of what they might mean. Finally, the third column is used to describe how people should respond to that communicative attempt. And think about it as if everyone responded in the same way, that would help that person even get more validation that that behavior has meaning and that is an effective way to communicate something. So for example, the response when somebody stands by a door might be to verbally offer him choices, or and pointing to a choice board with symbols for walk and bathroom and drink. I think the next slide actually shows that. So this is the example of what the person does. He pulls on his aide's hand, and it could mean he just wants the aide to stand up, or it could mean that he wants that person to help them go to the bathroom, go to the gym, walk outside, go to the water fountain. And now we have this chart, which we're sharing with everyone, that says that when the person pulls on your hand, it could mean one of those things. So what we want everyone to do is offer that person the choice, use the choice board, and we're going to use this choice board to help clarify what he wants, but also to teach him the symbols that represent those things, that maybe in the future, he'll be able to use the symbols more independently to make those requests. So when he stands when he pulls on your hand and leads you towards the door, then you're going to show this choice board, and you're going to say, point to bathroom where you say, do you need to go to the bathroom? Point to the water fountain to say, do you want to get a drink of water? Point to the gym to say, do you want to go to the gym? And point to walk. And you're asking these questions, and then you're going to respond in the way that you would typically accept as a way of him saying that is what he actually wants to do. Often, for individuals who have really subtle ways of communicating or unique ways, it'll be important to really describe what that behavior looks like. And even in some situations, I've used a photograph because we couldn't describe it in words. So in the example I'm showing you here, the first one says the person will touch the right finger to their chin, and that's a specific behavior that they do that people know what that means. And then farther down the list, it says the person will hold their hand out to get your hand and bring it to their back. Sounds kind of vague, but this was someone who would grab my hand and put it on his back, and he was doing that to say he wanted to back her up. And I didn't know that till staff told me that's what he was trying to convey. So even that's not a good description. So the better your description, the more useful the chart will be, so more people will understand it. And then another feature I might add to the communication dictionary is actually a fourth column where you indicate the situation or the place, because sometimes a behavior will mean something different in one situation than another, or in a different place than another. So in meeting all these individuals, and I was trying to figure out a way to really do a really good inventory, to write down all the ways they communicated, I developed an inventory of functional communication. Because what was happening was, I might sit down with a team or with someone who knew somebody really well, and I'd say, how does he communicate? I'm going to write down all the behaviors he demonstrates and what they mean so that we can share that with other people. And I would tell them, because I know you know this person and you respond to all the ways he communicates. And so he has very few escalated behaviors with you because you can respond to all of his subtle stuff because you really know him and you can interpret what he's doing. But I want to find a way to suck all this information out of your brain and put it on paper so we can share it with more people so they can be good communication partners for this person also. But sometimes I would ask people, how does he communicate? And they just didn't realize all the things they were doing and all the things they were responding to. So I found that inventory was one way that we could kind of a guided discussion to help them remember and be more aware of all the things they were responding to. So this inventory has several pages, but I'm just going to direct you to a couple of them that I think are the most useful. So the second page actually lists specific communication methods that I've observed in my work with a variety of individuals, and some of them they've taught me I wasn't aware of. So the way this would work is I would sit down with somebody one-to-one who really knew the person, and I would start by saying, I'm trying to get an idea of the different ways that this person communicates. So for example, does he ever make vocalizations? And if the person said yes, I'd say, is it just one kind of vocalization or are there several different kinds? And what does that vocalization mean? What does this vocalization mean? So I could kind of get a list of times when the vocalizations might need something. Sometimes I just make notes right here on this piece of paper that's got these lists of methods, and sometimes I'll actually write them down in their gesture dictionary and fill it out. When he makes this sound, it can mean that he has to go to the bathroom, or it could mean that he's getting hungry, and this is how we respond. And so sometimes I take these topics and I transfer that information to the gesture dictionary. So I might tell them sometimes people will look at something as a way to communicate. Does your son or does your classmate ever look at something as a way to communicate? Does it ever mean anything when he looks at something? Or are there any facial expressions that he makes that you know have some meaning? And I'll say sometimes people will reach out for something or tap on something or touch something, and sometimes that's some way that they have of communicating a certain message. So I go through each item and I give specific examples to help the person kind of search their memory. Does the person ever lead you anywhere? Do they ever pull you to a place? And what could that mean? And then I'll get an idea of maybe the multiple things they might mean. So where is it when he pulls you to the kitchen? What does that mean? When he pulls you to the bedroom, when he pulls you to the bathroom, when he pulls you to the door, there might be different, and this might give us information about a whole range of vocabulary this person is trying to express. And again, I will write all these down in the gesture dictionary. And then the next item on the list is manually guide someone to do a task. I've seen people do this. Well, they'll take your hand and put your hand on something. So put your hand on a cabinet to open it, put your hand on a jar. If you ever played with a young child when you're playing patty cake and you stop playing and they take your hands and push them together to say they want to play more. So any way that a child guides your hands to something is another way of communicating. And so I'll ask them, does your son ever do this? We'll talk about how sometimes someone will offer you an object. So hand you the keys to say you want to go in the car, or they might show you a picture of something. You know, does this person ever do any of this? Does they ever show you pictures in a magazine or pictures in a newspaper or pictures in the environment? Do they ever point to the calendar? So just trying to get an idea of all the ways that this person might be communicating. And I like to ask them about each individual one so I can kind of really get a really thorough list of all the ways this person communicates, because the more we know, the better able we are to support this person for successful communications. And then I'll talk about this idea of proximity. Does the person ever stand near something where it might mean something? Because I know some people who will stand near a door when they want to go out. I actually knew a woman who would stand near a lamp when she wanted it turned on. So I give these examples so they can really think, wow, does my son ever do that? And then I'll ask, do they ever use any pantomime? Or do they use common gestures? Do they wave hello or goodbye? Do they nod their head? And then I'll ask about whether they have any made-up signals. And sometimes someone will have a signal that they've learned. Maybe they learned a sign language younger, and they've now adapted that sign so it no longer looks like a sign that someone would recognize. And so we try to get people to explain what that gesture looks like and what meaning it has to them. I knew this man that would tap his fist on the side of his forehead and meant television. And when he would put his open palm on his forehead, that indicated the teacher who always had a headache. So sometimes they're very unique gestures they come up with. And so we want to write those down as well. We also want to be aware of any behaviors somebody has that is harmful to themselves or to someone else that you know that that child or that adult demonstrates because they're trying to communicate a certain message. We want to know what those are also. The next slide shows another section of the inventory that asks questions in a different way. It starts by asking what kinds of messages the person communicates. And the way I would use these questions, the first column says, the first item is, I like this. So it asks the staff member or the parent, how do you know when she likes something? How do you know when he likes something? Does he make a certain facial expression? Does he do a certain behavior or certain sets of behaviors? And so I will write down what that looks like when a person likes something, and there might be multiple things that they do. And I'll also want to indicate if whenever they communicate this, do they ever do it in a way that it could be harmful to themselves or somebody else? Is this all the time or just some of the times? And then also, do people typically understand that when they do this, that's a way of saying that they like it? Or is it something that only you would understand? And so then I go through the whole list. Do they have a way of communicating refusing? Do they have a way to get somebody's attention? How do you know when they want to stop something? So I'll go through the list with them item by item to see if that will help trigger other ways that person communicates. So I can then add those to this chart or add it to the gesture dictionary. And sometimes this information can be used to actually give us goals to start with. So if somebody has something that they communicate a certain way all the time, but it's only understood by a few people, that might be one message we want to teach them another way to communicate. The last thing I want to talk about is communication passports. And this is something you can download from the internet. There are samples at sample templates at www.communicationpassports.org.uk. And this is a book that details not just all the kinds of messages somebody communicates, but also more things about them, like who's important to them, who's their family members, who's their friends, what are things they like to talk about, and what are things that good communication partners do to support the communication. Maybe they talk slowly, maybe they wait for a response, maybe they use visual supports when they're talking to them. And then you might also have in there information about things they like to do or things they're working on or ways that they request help. So there's a variety of examples of different kinds of communication passports for different types of activities. There are some communication passports online specifically for if your child's going to be in the hospital, so things that might be important to hospital staff. And I often will go to Pinterest to see some examples there. And they've switched around different Pinterest sites. And actually, there's a Pinterest site now that I like that's called, you Google communication passports, but look for 35 best communication passports for 2019, and you'll find some really good examples. I can see that we only have 5 minutes left, and so I want to leave time for some questions. If anyone has any questions, this would be a time to bring those up.
Feel free to type your questions into the chat box if you have any questions. The chat box is on the lower right side of your screen in the speech bubble. Just click on that and type in your question. We do have a question that came in. Pat, where can we get the inventory of functional communication that you shared? Somebody asks.
So you can Google it. You can say inventory of functional communication with my name, and you can find downloads, or you can just email me. And my email address is politano@uic.edu. So that's POLITANO@uic.edu. And I'm happy to share it with anyone. It's a free tool that anyone can use, and it's actually been downloaded over 1,000 times through ResearchGate. Is that what it's called? Yeah. So it's been used around the world. Someone's asking, Miguel wants to know if he can share the passport.
Well,
yes, I can send it to Miguel, and he can also make it available for you guys to download. I don't have a link to it.
No, he'll pull it up. Do you want him to pull it up on the screen so everybody can see it?
I don't think he has it.
Yeah, he has it. I sent it to him.
No, he sent. Oh, I'm sorry.
So would you like to show
I'm
it
sorry.
to everybody now? There it is.
What Miguel is showing you now is actually not the inventory of functional communication. It's an example of a passport. So when you go to the website that I told you, that's communicationpassports.com or .org or whatever that was, you will see passports that you can download. And this is an example of one that I'm going to show you. And in this example that you download, the first slide gives you information about it. You get down to the fourth slide, it gives you a place that's the first page where you put in the person's name, and you want to personalize it for that person, where you put their name on it, and it would say things like, "This is a book about me," and the idea is they would share it with somebody so that that person would better understand how to communicate. So this book says, "This book will help you to get to know how to communicate with me." The next page of the passport is an index, and it tells you that the different pages in this book are, one is all about me, one is another page is things you need to know, the next page is my family, the next page is my friends, special things and special people, things I like to talk about. Pages 7 and 8 are how I communicate. Page 9 is what you can do to help me communicate. And so it lists all these, and as you go to each page, you'll see that there's an image that goes along with the text, and it gives you a blank template for someone to then fill in those types of things. So it just gives you a template of the kinds of things you might add to somebody's passport. So I just wanted to share this with you. Things that you should do or you shouldn't do, fun things, things I like to do. I can't stand it when you do a certain thing, things I'm working on. So all this information, you can see how that context would help you understand that person's communicative intent more. So I'm going to stop there.
Thank you so much, Pat. That was so informative. If you have further questions, feel free to contact Pat at her email directly. And I just want to let you all know we have more webinars coming. Our next webinar is scheduled for May 23rd, and it's about what happens after high school, and really focusing on transition to college for autistic and disabled youth. And then May 30th, we have a webinar on ABLE accounts. You can see all of our list of webinars at www.accessibilityonline.org/IDHD. Feel free to join us and spread the word. And thank you so much for joining us today. Goodbye.